I trusted my sister when she handed me those allergy pills. Take 2 before bed, Mara said with a gentle smile. You need rest before your long drive to Grandpa's will reading tomorrow. 20 minutes later, I was collapsed on my kitchen floor, throat tightening, sight fading into black, my heartbeat thudding so hard it rang through my head like a drum. She had swapped the labels. My own sister had poisoned me. I dragged myself toward my phone and dialed 911 before the world went dark. 4 days later, I walked into that will reading, the one Mara believed I would never live to see. The room fell completely silent. My parents stared in shock. Mara's face drained to the color of ash. But that still wasn't the moment that broke everything. It happened when 2 police officers entered and asked, "Which one of you is Mara Cole? We have questions about a federal investigation." What came next made my mother clap a hand over her mouth. My father's coffee cup slipped from his grasp and shattered across the marble floor. Have you ever realized that someone you loved your entire life had been quietly ruining you all along? My name is Hannah Cole. I'm 35 years old and I've spent the past 10 years working as an accountant in a small Indiana town where everyone knows who you are but no one truly notices you. I built what I believed was a solid, independent life. But now I see I was living inside a fragile house of cards my own family had been slowly pulling apart for years. That Thursday afternoon felt completely ordinary. I was wrapping up quarterly reports at my desk when my phone rang from an unknown number. The man on the line was Mr. Daniels, my grandfather's attorney. Grandpa Thomas had died 2 weeks earlier, and the will reading was set for Monday morning. But the call carried an odd tone. Mr. Daniel explained that Grandpa had included a sealed section of the will that could only be opened if I was there in person. Not my parents, not my sister Mara. Me alone. I remember a strange warmth spreading through my chest in a family where I had always been overlooked. Grandpa Thomas had chosen me. He was the only one who ever truly noticed me. 2 months before he passed, he called unexpectedly, asking unusual questions about my finances. Had I looked at my credit report lately? Was I struggling with loans? I laughed it off and told him everything was fine, even though it wasn't. The truth was my credit had been quietly destroyed for years. I had been denied home loans 3 times. I couldn't understand it. I paid every bill on time. I carried no debt that I knew about. I did everything right. Still the banks kept refusing me, and I kept blaming myself for some invisible error I couldn't see. During that last call, Grandpa mentioned my grandmother Margaret's name, then went quiet for a long moment like he wanted to say something important. But he changed the subject, and I was too distracted to push him. I wish now that I had listened more closely. Grandma Margaret died 5 years ago and the pain still hasn't faded. She was the one who braided my hair as a child, who called me her brave girl, who made me feel seen. When she passed, I waited for a letter, a keepsake, anything that might carry her love forward. Nothing ever came. Mara handled the estate and told me Grandma never cared about material things. I accepted it even though it broke my heart. Months later, I noticed Mara wearing a stunning pearl necklace I had never seen before. When I asked about it, she said she bought it at an estate sale. I believed her. Why wouldn't I trust my own sister? Within an hour of the attorney's call, Mara rang me with a sweetness that felt almost rehearsed. She asked when I was leaving for the will reading, which route I planned to drive, and whether I was feeling well enough for the long trip. She took special interest in my seasonal allergies, which had been flaring up all week. In hindsight, I can see the intent behind every carefully worded question. At the time, I assumed she was simply being attentive. That night, as I was winding down for a quiet evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Mara. She said she was stopping by with new allergy medication and wanted me rested for the long drive Monday. I smiled at the text, moved by what I believed was genuine sisterly care. After a break-in 2 years earlier, I had installed security cameras, and I watched the screen as her car pulled into my driveway. As I opened the door to greet her, I had no idea that Mara had spent the past 8 years quietly dismantling my life from behind the scenes. And that night, she was preparing to repeat a crime she had already pulled off 5 years earlier, one that had permanently erased my grandmother's final words to me. Mara walked into my home that Thursday evening wearing a warm smile, a small white pharmacy bag in her hand. She looked exactly like a worried younger sister, her tone gentle as she placed the bag in my palm. "These are stronger than your usual brand," she said. "Take 2 before bed and you'll sleep like a baby. You need your rest before that long drive Monday." I noticed her glance briefly at the security camera mounted in the corner of my living room, but I dismissed it. I assumed she was just curious about my setup. She hugged me before leaving, holding on longer than she usually did. I remember thinking how good it felt that we were finally growing closer. I had spent years feeling invisible in my own family. And here was my sister showing up with medicine and what looked like real concern. I thanked her and watched her taillights fade down my quiet street. I followed her instructions exactly, swallowing 2 small pills with a glass of water. Then I sat down on the couch and turned on the television. The local news rambled on about city politics and the upcoming weather. I pulled a blanket over my legs and waited to feel sleepy. Instead, something else began. About 20 minutes after taking those pills, my throat started to tighten. At first, I blamed my allergies. Maybe dust from earlier cleaning. But the tightness became crushing pressure, like unseen hands squeezing my airway. My vision blurred around the edges. My heart slammed so hard I could hear it, beating wildly and out of sync like it no longer knew what to do. This wasn't allergies. This wasn't a reaction. Something was very wrong. I tried to stand, but my legs collapsed beneath me. I hit the floor, knocking over the lamp beside the table. The room spun violently. With sudden clarity, I knew I was going into anaphylactic shock. Those pills were not allergy medicine. My sister had given me something meant to shut my body down. I felt my airway closing, every breath a desperate struggle for a trace of air. My phone sat on the coffee table just feet away, but it felt unreachable. I dragged myself across the carpet, arms shaking, darkness creeping into my vision. I reached up and knocked the phone to the floor, fumbling with trembling fingers until I managed to dial 911. When the operator answered, I could barely speak. I forced out my address in broken gasps, each word stealing what little air I had left. Then everything went black. I later learned my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, saved my life. She is 67 years old, a retired schoolteacher who lives alone next door. She heard the sirens and rushed over in her bathrobe and slippers. The paramedics found me unconscious on my living room floor, barely breathing, my lips turning blue. Mrs. Patterson held my hand as they worked on me, then climbed into the ambulance and rode with me to the hospital. She waited in the lobby through the night, refusing to go home until she knew I would live. I woke up Friday morning in the ICU with tubes in my arms and an oxygen mask covering my face. A nurse told me I arrived just in time. Another 10 minutes and they would not have been able to save me. That afternoon, a woman in a dark blazer entered my room and introduced herself as Detective Martinez. She asked if I felt strong enough to answer questions about my sister, Mara. I nodded, my throat still burning and sore. What she told me next destroyed everything I thought I understood about my own life. Mara had been under federal investigation for identity theft for the last 6 months. The victim was me. Over 8 years, someone had opened 7 credit accounts using my name and piled up $187,000 in fraudulent debt. That person was my own sister. The unexplained credit damage, the denied loans, the quiet financial shame I had lived with for years all traced back to Mara. She had been stealing my identity and dismantling my future while smiling at me across the Thanksgiving table. I could have fallen apart in that moment. Part of me wanted to. Instead, something firmer took hold. I asked Detective Martinez to hand me the hospital phone. My first call went to my cloud storage provider. I reset the password on my security camera system and locked down the footage so no one could alter or erase it. The video showed Mara entering my home with the pills. It showed her glance toward the camera. It showed her placing the poison in my hand with a sister's smile. My second call was to the credit bureaus. I requested emergency freezes on all 3 credit files. No one would ever open another account in my name again. Then I turned back to Detective Martinez and asked for copies of every document tied to the investigation. I was done being passive. If my sister had been undoing my life for 8 years, I needed to know exactly how. As I reviewed the timeline from my hospital bed, one detail made my blood turn cold. The first fraudulent account had been opened just 3 months after my grandmother Margaret died. That was right after Mara managed the estate. Right after she told me Grandma was not sentimental and left me nothing. Detective Martinez noticed my reaction and leaned closer. Identity thieves often escalate after an early success. She said confidence grows and boundaries disappear. I stared at the papers and felt a terrible thought take shape. If Mara began stealing from me right after handling Grandma's estate, what else had she taken back then? What else vanished that I never knew was meant for me? I spent the weekend recovering in that hospital room. My body slowly repaired itself while my mind replayed every memory of my sister. Each kindness now felt calculated. Every gentle word rang empty. On Sunday evening, my hospital phone rang. It was Mr. Daniels, Grandpa Thomas's attorney. He told me the will reading was still set for Monday morning, exactly as my grandfather wanted. Then he added one more thing. Grandpa Thomas had left specific instructions. A private nurse named Margaret would bring something to me Monday morning just before the reading. She would arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. Mr. Daniels didn't know what the delivery contained, only that Grandpa Thomas had been precise about the timing and the person receiving it. It had to be me, and it had to happen that morning. I ended the call and lay staring at the ceiling tiles above my hospital bed. My grandfather had known. Somehow, against all logic, he had sensed something like this could occur. He had prepared for it. He had left instructions and set plans in motion that would only come into play if I ended up exactly where I was now. The question that kept me awake all night was terrifying in its simplicity. What had Grandpa Thomas uncovered before he died? And what was Margaret bringing me that he trusted no one else to deliver? I got my answer at 7 o'clock Monday morning. I had been discharged just 30 minutes earlier, still shaky but determined to make it to the will reading. I was sitting in the hospital lobby waiting for my cab when a woman in her 60s approached with kind eyes and a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. She introduced herself as Margaret and told me she had been my grandfather's private hospice nurse during his final 6 months. Grandpa Thomas had given her strict instructions. If anything ever happened to me, if I landed in a hospital or found myself in trouble, she was to place 2 items directly into my hands and no one else's. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive along with a sealed envelope bearing my name in my grandfather's unsteady handwriting. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a note that stole the breath from my lungs. "My brave girl," it read, "if you are reading this, I was right to worry. Watch the video before you face them. And know this, your grandmother never forgot you. What Mara took from you 5 years ago, I have done my best to return." I stared at the words until tears blurred them beyond focus. Margaret squeezed my shoulder and told me there was a quiet room down the hall where I could watch the video alone. She guided me there and waited outside while I plugged the USB into my laptop. My grandfather's face appeared on the screen, and even knowing he was gone, seeing him alive again hit me like a physical blow. He looked frail, propped against pillows in what had to be his hospice bed, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. He spoke straight to the camera as if he knew I would one day be watching. "Hannah," he said, "6 months ago, I was going through your grandmother Margaret's belongings. I found her personal diary hidden in a box of old photographs. The last entry was written the week before she died. He paused, his hands shaking as he held up a small leather journal. He read aloud, "Gave the letter and mother's pearls to Mara to deliver to Hannah. I hope my brave girl knows how proud I am of her." His voice cracked at the end. "Hannah, your grandmother left you her most precious jewelry and a handwritten letter telling you how much she loved you. Mara never delivered them. I found the pearl necklace hidden in Mara's jewelry box. She has been wearing it for years, pretending she bought it herself. The letter, I believe she destroyed it." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. 5 years of grief. 5 years of believing my grandmother had forgotten me. 5 years of watching Mara wear those pearls while feeling that familiar pain of being invisible. It had all been a lie. Grandma Margaret had loved me. She had left me her most cherished possession and her final words, and Mara had stolen them both. The video continued as Grandpa Thomas explained that once he discovered the truth about the pearls, he began digging deeper. He hired a private investigator. He reached out to Detective Martinez, who was already building a case against Mara for identity theft. He wanted all the proof before confronting anyone. "I tried to tell you, Hannah," he said, regret filling his eyes. "2 months ago, I called and asked about your financial troubles. I was trying to open the conversation, but you insisted everything was fine and I was a coward. I could not shatter your world over the phone." He wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. "I also knew that if I warned you, you would confront Mara immediately. She would have time to destroy evidence, create alibis, and manipulate your parents. I needed to build a case that could not be challenged first. I thought I had more time." His voice fell to a whisper. "I ran out of time. Hannah, but I made sure the truth would reach you one way or another." Then his tone shifted, sharper and urgent. "If you are watching this from a hospital, it means Mara has made her move. She knows I left you a sealed letter in my will. She will try to intercept it the same way she intercepted Margaret's letter 5 years ago. Her plan will be simple. She will arrive at the attorney's office with forged paperwork claiming you authorized her to receive your mail. After she gets the letter, she will tell you it was a short note, nothing important, or that it was misplaced in the confusion. I know this because it is exactly what she told you about Margaret's letter. Grandmother was not sentimental. That was a lie, Hannah. Margaret loved you more than anyone in this family ever understood." The video ended, and I sat in silence, letting the truth settle deep inside me. My grandfather had seen everything. He had planned for everything. And now I was going to walk into that while reading, carrying knowledge no one expected me to have. I arrived at the attorney's office 5 minutes before 10. Detective Martinez met me in the parking lot holding a small velvet box. Inside were my grandmother's pearls, recovered from Mara's home that very morning as evidence. I clasped them around my neck and walked inside. The conference room went completely still when I appeared. My parents sat on one side of the long table, my sister on the other. Mara's face drained of color the instant she saw the pearls resting against my skin. She knew exactly what they meant. I said nothing and took my seat. The attorney read the will. 70% of my grandfather's estate was left to me. He included a written explanation. "This is not favoritism," he wrote. "This is compensation for what was stolen from my granddaughter and recognition of a character that stayed kind despite receiving no kindness from her own family." My mother let out a small sound of disbelief. My father stared down at the table. Mara's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. When the reading ended, Mara stood abruptly and said she needed air. She grabbed her designer purse and rushed toward the door, but Detective Martinez and 2 uniformed officers were already waiting in the parking lot. I watched through the conference room window as they stopped her beside her luxury car, the one I now knew had been bought using my stolen credit. "Mara Cole," Detective Martinez said clearly, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, federal identity theft, theft of property, and forgery. During the search, an officer pulled a folded document from Mara's purse. It was a forged power of attorney dated that very morning, authorizing Mara to receive all mail and legal documents on my behalf. The signature was a nearly perfect copy of my handwriting. My grandfather had predicted her plan down to the smallest detail. As the handcuffs closed around her wrists, Mara locked eyes with our mother through the window. "Mom," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Tell them I was helping you. Tell them you knew." My mother's face went completely blank. She said nothing. She did not move. Inside the conference room, Detective Martinez wrote something in her small black notebook. I turned toward her with the question that had been tightening in my chest ever since Mara screamed those words. What did my mother actually know? Detective Martinez met my gaze calmly. "That will be our next discussion, Miss Cole." That discussion came much sooner than I expected. Less than 10 minutes after Mara was led away in handcuffs, Detective Martinez returned to the conference room. My parents were still seated at the table, my mother clutching the chair arms as if she might drift away if she let go, my father staring down at the wood grain like it might offer answers he was afraid to face. The detective shut the door and spoke directly to my mother. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "we have evidence that you became aware of the identity theft 3 years ago and took active steps to conceal it." My mother snapped her head up. "That is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "I had no idea what Mara was doing. I am just as shocked as anyone." Detective Martinez opened a folder and laid several documents across the table. Bank statements showed monthly transfers from my mother's account to Mara's, amounts that matched the minimum payments on the fraudulent credit accounts exactly. Those payments had kept the accounts out of collections, preventing alerts that might have reached me. There were also printed text messages, exchanges between my mother and Mara discussing how to respond if I ever questioned my credit issues. "Tell her it is probably just a mistake at the bank," my mother had written. "These things happen all the time. Act sympathetic, but do not offer to help her look into it." The final piece was a deleted email investigators recovered from Mara's computer. My mother had written it 2 years earlier. "Just make sure she never finds out," the message said. "I cannot lose you, too." My mother opened her mouth to deny it again, but I pulled out my phone and played my grandfather's video. His voice filled the room, steady and precise, explaining exactly what he had uncovered and when. He listed dates. He referenced bank records. He described catching the text messages on Mara's phone while she believed he was asleep. My mother's face drained of color as she listened. When the video ended, she did not deny it again. She began to cry instead. "You do not understand what it was like," she said through tears. "I was not ready to be a mother when I had Hannah. I was 22 years old. I had dreams. I wanted to travel, to see the world, to figure out who I was before becoming someone's mother. But Thomas, my own father, convinced me to keep the pregnancy. He said I would regret it forever if I did not." She looked at me with an expression I had never seen, part guilt, part accusation. "I have spent 35 years feeling like my life was taken from me. And then you grew up so independent, Hannah, so capable. You never needed me. You handled everything on your own and never asked for help. But Mara needed me. Mara called me every day. Mara wanted my advice, my comfort, my presence. When I found out what she had done to you, I could not lose the only daughter who actually wanted me." I sat perfectly still as 35 years of distance finally made sense. Every missed birthday call, every ignored graduation, every holiday where my mother looked straight through me. She had never bonded with me because she never wanted me. And when she finally had a daughter who needed her, she chose to shield that daughter's crimes instead of protecting me from them. My father had remained silent until then, but finally he spoke, his voice rough and bewildered. "What do you mean you knew for 3 years? What do you mean you helped her hide it? Detective Martinez slid another document across the table. This was a loan application from 5 years earlier, co-signed by my father. Mara had told him that I had already agreed to guarantee it and only needed a family member as a co-signer for paperwork reasons. He signed it without asking questions, without calling me to confirm, without a second thought. Without realizing it, he had helped his younger daughter commit fraud against his older daughter. He stared down at the document with his signature on it, then looked up at his wife. You knew about this. For 3 years, you watched Hannah struggle and you stayed silent. My mother's tears hardened into anger. You never cared enough to ask why Hannah's life was so difficult. She fired back at him. You just assumed she was less capable than Mara. You compared them constantly. You bragged about Mara's apartment, her car, her lifestyle, while Hannah lived in a small house and drove an old sedan. It never crossed your mind to wonder how your younger daughter could afford so much on her salary. It was easier to believe Hannah was the failure than to look at what was really happening. My father looked stunned. The two of them began arguing in sharp whispers, years of buried resentment finally spilling out. The image of family they had maintained my entire life collapsed right there in that conference room. I watched it unfold with an unexpected sense of distance. After a moment, I stood up slowly. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. A calm settled over me that I had never felt before. For 8 years, I said, my quiet voice cutting through their argument, I believed I was a failure. Every closed door, every rejected application, every landlord who glanced at my credit report and said no. I blamed myself. I believed I was making some mistake I couldn't see. I paused and looked at each of them. But it was you, all of you, in different ways. I turned toward the window where Mara had been arrested. Mara stole my name, my credit, my future. She stole Grandma's letter and her pearls. For 5 years, I believed I had been forgotten by the woman who loved me most. I faced my mother. You discovered the theft and chose to protect the thief. Because I never needed you enough. Because I made the mistake of being independent. I looked at my father. And you never once asked why my life was so hard. You just assumed Mara was the success and I was the disappointment. It was easier than paying attention. Neither of them could look at me. The attorney cleared his throat. There is one more item, he said. Grandpa Thomas recovered a copy of Margaret's original letter from her personal attorney's records. Margaret had kept a duplicate. He handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my grandmother's graceful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. I read the letter aloud so everyone in the room could hear what had been taken from me. My brave girl, I know your life has not been easy in that family. I have seen how they overlook you while praising your sister. But I have also seen how you keep your heart gentle anyway. That takes more courage than they will ever understand. I am leaving you my mother's pearls. They were meant for the granddaughter who inherited my spirit, not just my blood. Wear them and remember. You were always enough. You were always loved. Your grandmother, Margaret. For the first time that day, I let myself cry. Not from pain, but from finally being seen. My grandmother had known. She had watched, understood, and loved me anyway. She had tried to tell me, and Mara had stolen those words. But now I had them. Now I knew the truth. My mother reached for my arm as I carefully folded the letter. Hannah, please, she said. You have to understand. I was young. I was overwhelmed. I made mistakes. I gently took her hand off my arm. You did not make a mistake, Mom. I said, you made a choice. Every single month for 3 years, you made that same choice. I lifted my purse and slipped the letter safely inside. I hope someday you understand the difference. I walked toward the door and did not look back. In the lobby, Mrs. Patterson was waiting with a thermos of hot tea and a soft cardigan. "Come on, dear," she said quietly. "Let me get you home." As I left with this woman I had only known for 2 years, I realized she had shown me more care in one morning than my own mother had shown me in 35 years. 6 weeks later, I woke up in my grandfather Thomas's cottage to birds singing in the apple trees outside my window. It was the same sound that greeted Thomas and Margaret every morning for 40 years. Now it greeted me. I stayed still for a moment, feeling the cotton sheets against my skin, watching early sunlight pass through the lace curtains my grandmother had hung decades earlier. For the first time in my adult life, I did not wake up with dread pressing on my chest. There were no mysterious bills in my mailbox, no credit denials to brace for, no unseen force quietly working against me. The weight I had carried for 8 years was finally gone. I got up and made coffee in the small kitchen where Margaret used to bake apple pies every fall. My credit had been fully restored. I learned that Grandpa Thomas had quietly paid off all $187,000 of fraudulent debt before he died. He wanted my new beginning to truly be new, with no trace of Mara's crimes following me into this life. I touched the pearl necklace at my throat as the coffee brewed. I wore it every day now. It was my grandmother's most treasured possession, meant for me all along, and I would never remove it. I had started a small bookkeeping practice from the cottage sunroom, a bright space with windows on 3 sides overlooking the orchard. 3 local clients had already signed on small businesses that needed someone reliable to handle their accounts. The work was steady and fulfilling, and I could do it all from a place that finally felt like home. Every afternoon around 3 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson walked over from next door with a plate of homemade cookies and a thermos of tea. We sat on the porch and talked about nothing important, just easy conversation between 2 people who truly enjoyed each other's company. She became the family I chose, and I became part of hers. Detective Martinez called me on a Thursday morning with final updates on the cases. Mara was facing 18 to 25 years in federal prison. The charges were extensive. Identity theft totaling $187,000 in fraud across state lines. Aggravated assault for the pills she gave me containing a compound designed to trigger severe anaphylaxis. Theft of property for my grandmother's jewelry valued at $15,000 and forgery tied to the power of attorney document she planned to use. My mother was formally charged as an accessory after the fact for 3 years of actively concealing a felony. She would avoid prison due to her age and clean record, but she was required to testify against Mara at trial. She was also ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution and would carry a felony conviction for the rest of her life. My father, though not criminally charged, filed for divorce and listed the family home for sale. He sent me a letter apologizing for his blindness and asking for nothing in return. I read it once and placed it in a drawer. I was not ready to respond, and I was not sure I ever would be. One Saturday morning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw both of my parents stepping out of the same car. It was the first time they had been together since my father filed for divorce. They walked up to my door side by side, and I understood immediately why they were there. I let them in because that is the kind of person my grandmother raised me to be. I brewed tea and laid out cookies Mrs. Patterson had brought over the day before. Then I sat across from them and listened as they made their full appeal. My mother cried while she talked. Mara was facing nearly 20 years in prison. She was their daughter. She had made horrible choices, but my mother said she did not deserve to lose her entire life. My father looked worn down, nothing like the man who once led our family table. He explained that a letter from me asking for leniency could matter at sentencing. A judge would consider it seriously. It could mean the difference between 18 years and 12 or even less. They were asking me to help protect my sister from the full weight of what she had done to me. I let them finish without interrupting or arguing. When they were done, I set my teacup down and spoke evenly. I spent 35 years wondering what I had done to make this family treat me like I did not exist. Now I finally know. I did nothing wrong. Every one of you made choices. Mara chose to steal from me, not once, but over 8 years. She chose to destroy my grandmother's letter and wear her pearls as if they belonged to her. She chose to poison me so I would not reach the will reading. Mom, you chose to help her cover it all up because she made you feel needed in ways I never did. Dad, you chose not to see what was happening because it was easier to believe I was the disappointment than to face the truth. I paused and looked at them. I will not write that letter. Not because I want Mara to suffer. I do not. But consequences are how people learn that their actions matter. Maybe 18 years will teach her what this family never did. And maybe watching her face that reality will teach both of you something as well. Neither of them said a word. After a long silence, they stood and walked out of my cottage without looking back. I watched their car fade down the long driveway and felt only calm. That night, I sat in my grandfather Thomas's reading chair with Margaret's letter resting in my hands. I had read it many times before, but this time was different. I was no longer reading it as a discovery. I was reading it as a foundation, something permanent in who I was and who I was becoming. I found a beautiful wooden frame at a local antique shop and placed the letter inside. I hung it on the living room wall beside the photographs of Thomas and Margaret that had been there for decades. My real family, the ones who protected me even after they were gone. Beneath the photos, I placed a small card with words I wrote myself. Family is not who you are born to. It is who chooses you and who you choose in return. A month later, early autumn arrived, and the apple trees in the orchard were heavy with fruit. I sat on the cottage porch at sunset with a cup of tea cooling in my hands, watching the sky turn gold and rose over the Indiana fields. Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden next door where she was showing her granddaughter how to plant tulip bulbs for spring. I waved back, smiling without effort. I touched the pearl necklace at my throat. The one my grandmother left me 5 years ago. The one I finally received 6 weeks ago. The one I will wear for the rest of my life. I received your letter, grandmother, I murmured into the evening air. I know you never forgot me. I know you noticed me when no one else did. A light breeze moved through the apple trees, and somewhere close by, a wind chime Grandpa Thomas had hung decades earlier rang out 3 gentle notes. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. Family is not blood, I whispered. Family is who chooses to stay in your life and who fights for you even after they are gone. I opened my eyes to the fading sunset. This is just the beginning, I said about the life I should have been living all along. I lifted my tea and stepped back inside to start dinner, leaving the porch light on in case Mrs. Patterson decided to stop by later. The cottage glowed softly against the darkening Indiana sky. And for the first time in my life, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. Hannah's story reminds us of a truth many people learn too late. The ones who hurt us the deepest are often the ones we trust the most. But here is what truly matters. You are not responsible for the choices others make, even when those people are family. If someone in your life makes you feel small, unseen, or unworthy, that speaks only to who they are, not who you are. Real family does not quietly tear you down while smiling in your face. Real family shows up with a thermos of tea when your world is falling apart. Sometimes the family we choose loves us better than the family we were born into, and that is more than enough. You deserve people who truly see you, who stand up for you, who celebrate your strength instead of punishing you for it. Never allow anyone to convince you that you are less than you are. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful story like this one. I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted was secretly working against you? How did you find the strength to walk away? Share your story below.